So today's agenda, we're going to be, I'll give you an overview of who MEI is, the Vjoon K4 system, and the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite. And from there, we're going to hop into the demonstration. Afterwards, we'll have a little bit of QA and wrap-up, but this is designed to be a very quick webinar. We're aiming for about 30 to 35 minutes. That'll give you some information about what the systems can do, and then ultimately we hope to be able to follow up with you and talk about how you could use the technology. Very quickly about MEI, we are a commercial software developer and integrator. We've been in business over 20 years working with the professional publishing and communications industry. We're a premier development partner of Adobe's and a top reseller for the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite, and we also partner with Apple, Microsoft, and Quark. We have over 2,400 customers in 53 countries, and as you can see, a large number of our customers, of course, are utilizing the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite. The Digital Publishing Suite itself is a technology that's only been commercially available for the last 18 months, so it is an evolving and developing platform. And across K4, the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite, and our other products, we're a full-service solution provider. We provide publishing workflow and automation solutions. We have a creative services team that we call Nervous Pixel. We have training, integration, and support staff that actually work with you to teach you how to use technology like the technology you'll see today. And of course, we develop add-on technology for solutions like the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite. An example of that, we held a webinar recently for the MEI Portico product, which is a custom storefront solution for the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite. So for those of you that are not familiar, you may be wondering, what is Vjoon K4? K4 is, and as it's known, the K4 cross-media publishing platform is a workflow management solution. It's database-driven and task-based workflow that allows any number of content creators to collaborate on projects. It allows individual users to work on their pieces of content, so editors can work on text, designers can work on layout, photographers and retouchers can work on images. Manage all of that content and allow you to use it in many different formats, so that in the end you can create print product, online, mobile, as well as other electronic outputs like the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite, which you're going to see today. The Adobe Digital Publishing Suite is Adobe's solution for creating rich interactive tablet editions. It allows you to take desktop tools like Adobe InDesign and design content that can then be packaged and distributed to your own branded application. This is what allows folks like Wired Magazine to create applications where they can deliver the different issues of their magazine, which you can buy and subscribe to and then download onto your iPad, your Amazon Kindle Fire. And of course, there are more and more tablet devices emerging every day. The Digital Publishing Suite enables you to carry through that life cycle from the end of the creation process of Adobe InDesign all the way through the monetization and the analyzing of your content and how your consumers are using it. So you can really think of it as picking up where the Creative Suite leaves off and creating a seamless solution for distributing your content, whether you're creating magazines and books and newspapers, or you're creating corporate collateral or training material. It really doesn't matter. Now, these digital channels create challenges, and these are really old challenges for these new channels. Essentially, what you get is the problem where you're creating yet another output. So if you create a small print and a large print edition, you're already familiar with the fact that you have two InDesign layouts, one for your regular edition and one for your large print edition. But now you're talking about tablets, and you're thinking, well, I might have an iPad in my portrait orientation and an iPad in my landscape orientation. But I also might have an iPhone and an iPhone 5 format. I might have an Amazon Kindle Fire format, an Amazon Kindle Fire HD. You get the point. You're talking about more layouts, more data. That's all using the same content. So how can we manage that and make that much more streamlined? And ultimately, how can we produce multiple highly designed editions without compromising our design integrity, without adding too much additional time or doubling our resources. Certainly that's not something that, that many people can do today, all while maintaining the look and feel and the quality associated with your brand. I think we would all be surprised if we opened up one of the Condé Nast titles and it didn't have that highly crafted, really well thought out design, whether you were working in iPad or iPhone or viewing it in print. You want that same quality no matter where your readers are viewing the content. And certainly when you start talking about digital editions, you're not just talking about text and layout and photographs. You're talking about video and audio and slideshows and all of this extra content that now needs to be managed. So ultimately, how can you reduce the complexity of those multiple output mediums and in the end automate some of the redundant tasks so that all of us as designers and editors and people who are part of the production process can focus on the things we do best. So what are we going to see? Today you're going to see how we can manage content across multiple editions. I'm going to show you how we can have the same text in multiple layouts, and as the editor is working on the text, they can save their changes back to the K4 server, and those changes will propagate into the different designs, the layouts that the designer is working on. And how can we efficiently manage DPS metadata? If you've opened up a Wired magazine or the New Yorker or any of the other DPS editions, you'll notice that it's not just the designs you're looking at, the layouts, but there's a digital table of contents. There's a browse view in your application. How can we manage that metadata as part of the workflow so the editor can get assigned a task to actually go and complete that metadata on the layout that the designer is working on in Adobe InDesign? And then ultimately, how can we build and upload folios to the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite? The folio format, you'll hear me refer to this numerous times, is the format that Adobe has developed for the Digital Publishing Suite. You can think of it as akin to a PDF, but a PDF on steroids. And how can we then, in addition to all of this management of our layouts and automation of creating folios, how can we generate HTML very quickly and directly from our print content? While we want to be able to create rich content in Adobe InDesign, there are certainly times in our workflow where we can embed HTML, and we don't have to go through the process of creating an additional InDesign layout. And ultimately, I'm going to talk a little bit about InDesign 6's liquid layout features and how K4 can help automate and manage that process. And I think you're going to see some very, very exciting things. So let's go ahead and jump into the demonstration. Just a reminder that if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A pod, and we will answer them as we go. I'm going to hop into Adobe InDesign here, and you'll see inside InDesign I actually have two layouts opened up, and you can see one of the layouts is the print edition of my story. I have this in spreads, and the second layout is my iPad edition, and I'm sharing and using much of the same content. So if I zoom in on my iPad edition here, you'll notice that my body copy starts with in 1988, 2 cash-strapped college students. And if I go to my print edition, you can see here we see the exact same content, but it's a slightly different design. It's got a slightly different typographical format. And what I want to show you is how easy it is to manage content across multiple layouts, and ultimately, when the editor makes a change to the text, have that text show up as changed in all of the layouts that it's used within. So we're going to leave Adobe InDesign for a moment. Go over to Adobe InCopy, which is the text editing companion to Adobe InDesign. It allows editors to have the same typographical quality and H&J engine of Adobe InDesign, but it gives them tools that are specific to the editing process. And I'm going to open up a palette that I have here in InDesign called the K4 Query Palette, which allows me to see content that's being managed by the K4 system. The K4 system, as I said, is a workflow system, so it manages not only assets like the layouts and the text and the images, but it manages the process of creating those documents. So I can see here in the query palette here that I have tasks and statuses, and I'll zoom in here, and the system is going to manage what needs to happen. And I can see one of the tasks for my story is to copy edit the story. So I'm going to just go ahead and double click on that. And K4 will begin to open the document here in InCopy. And it's immediately going to prompt me to choose which geometry I want to preview my layout within. And that's because we have text that's connected to multiple layouts. I'm going to choose my print edition, and that's going to open up the text. Now you might be wondering, well, why am I looking at it in the print edition when I really want the changes to go into both? And that's because InCopy's layout view actually shows you the context of how the text looks on the InDesign layout. So when we open up the file in InCopy, we need to tell it which layout we want to preview against. And I can very easily make changes in the text like you would in Microsoft Word or in any other text editor. I'm just going to select and make a change or two here. Now I'm previewing this against the print layout here in InCopy, so I can see the typography and the type settings of my print layout. But I can very easily switch the geometry of this and go to my iPad layout. And when I do that, you'll notice that I see the same text now, but within the context of my tablet layout. And you'll notice, of course, the formatting is different, and that's because the paragraph and character styles are different in my tablet layout than they were in the print edition. So now as the editor finishes up, they can go and finish their task. They can save that back to the K4 system, and I can tell K4 that, for instance, I'm done copy editing this, and it will know that the article is now ready for print, and we have a few steps here for the web publishing process. If you're curious about the web publishing process, I do invite you to join us back at our session next week, where we'll be talking more about how K4 automates content out to the web. Go ahead and click OK. That'll save the file back to the K4 system and close it on my workstation. And I'll go back over to Adobe InDesign, where you'll see a hazard symbol over the text. And I can very easily update the text, and it will load in the changes that I made. So we can see here the changes to that deck here. And if we go to the iPad edition, I can do the same thing, and we see the text change. So there you have it. There you see that we can make changes once and have that go out to the different editions in which it's being used. And you may be thinking, well, why does this matter if the same InDesign user is working on both layouts? Well, there, of course, are many cases and many workflows where it's not just one designer working on the print and iPad edition, but one designer that's working on the base layout and another designer who's bringing in interactivity and really subdividing out that workflow. But regardless, you don't want to have to rely on the designer having to go and copy and paste text between multiple layouts. K4 can handle that automatically in the background. Now, in our digital edition, we also want to add interactivity, and we can manage interactivity inside K4. And you'll see if I open up my query palette here in InDesign, I'll see a number of images, but I also have a video file as well. And I can drag and drop that video file onto the page. And once I do that, I can use the folio overlays panel here in InDesign, and this is a standard Adobe DPS panel that sits inside InDesign, where I can go and control how my interactivity is going to work. And in my case, I want to allow the user to tap to view controller, so I'll go ahead and set that. Now, if you're using Adobe DPS today, you'll know that, of course, if you want to preview what this is going to look like, you can click a preview button, and the Adobe InDesign document here will go and turn itself into a folio file and open itself up in the Adobe Content Viewer. And of course, we just saw in that process that it went and built that folio file, and my InDesign workstation was locked up. But now I'm here in the Content Viewer. I can click and, of course, play my video as well. Now, there are, of course, other things that go into this. Remember, of course, we talked about metadata, and you'll notice, of course, we have a browse view and we have a table of contents, and you'll notice that there's no metadata here yet. So how can we make that metadata appear? Well, within the Adobe interface, Adobe has mechanisms within a panel called the Folio Builder panel that you can actually go and build your folio. And that involves a little bit of what you just saw in building a folio and then saving that file up to the Adobe folio producer service. How can we make that a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more automated? Well, first off, we can manage the metadata as part of the K4 workflow. This will allow someone like an editor to get a task so that they can go in and add the metadata for their folio, so that they can receive a prompt here in InCopy or in InDesign or within their web browser, and they can then go in and fill in the information that they want their consumers to see in that table of contents and browse view. And then they can go ahead and finish their task so that everyone else working on the project knows that the metadata has been added to that layout. Now, in addition to that, the designer, of course, is still working on the layout. They can go ahead and they can save a copy of that back to the K4 server. And rather than build the folio file on the designer's workstation, they can very easily have the K4 system automatically build that folio. So I can go right into a query palette. I can select my layout, and I can click a button that will automate the building of a folio file. And that will automatically create a folio file, but rather than locking up my workstation to create that folio file, K4 will use the Adobe InDesign server that's part of the K4 system to generate that folio file and output that to a location on my file server, so that anyone who wants to preview what that layout looks like can just go ahead and open up that folio file, and it will load in the Adobe Content Viewer. And here we can see the landscape format, which I haven't started working on yet. But if I rotate that, I can see my portrait edition, and I can go ahead, of course, and click on my video. So how is this different than the way it works inside InDesign natively? Well, first off, it builds this folio file on a server. So rather than waiting for the InDesign workstation to build the folio, it's going to go ahead and do that automatically in the background. It's also going to output this folio file locally. And this is a little bit different. And if you're not familiar with the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite, you may not know that it is a hosted service. So when I'm building folio files using the Folio Builder panel in InDesign, I'm actually saving pages, saving folio files to the Adobe Folio Producer service, and I'm uploading those files to the Adobe server. And if you have limited bandwidth or you have a lot of production, that can sometimes lead to waiting while that file does upload. So within K4, we offload that process. So rather than having the designer or the editor have to wait, we can do this automatically by the server. So we can build that folio file like you just saw, and we can also have automations that allow us to upload that folio file so that when we're ready, we can have K4 automatically build a folio file for this layout, and then we can upload it to the Adobe Folio Producer service, and that's what I've got here inside this browser window. And what you'll see in a moment is a new folio will appear with my article inside of it and all of the metadata that we created inside InCopy in a moment. And so this is very beneficial because your editors and your designers don't have to wait while this is happening. They can go and continue working on making changes to that layout or making a change to another layout. You can see here that folio is beginning to be created. I'll go ahead and open that up, and we'll see in a moment that the article that I'm working on will be added to it. And so the benefit of this is that individual designers can work on their pieces, and the system can take care of uploading, whether that's triggered by an individual designer or editor, or whether that happens automatically based on where you are in the workflow. Once those are all uploaded, we can start to assemble our issue and ultimately create that final folio file that we're going to end up publishing as an issue in our magazine. All right. So we'll go back to InDesign here. Of course, demos are, I'm subject to the speed of the internet. I can see here in the query palette that the automation is kicking off. It is uploading our article. And we'll come back here and we'll see that in a moment. I'm going to do exactly what I was just suggesting, which is that the designer continue on and work on other things at the same time. So within InDesign, within K4, we can automate that creation process. And actually, as I'm closing this file in InDesign, you'll see here over in the DPS dashboard that folio file is now here and uploaded as part of my overall folio. And I can see the metadata, including the change that I made to that kicker, the story of yards. So I can see all of that information coming in. And this is really handy because now that we've uploaded it to the Folio Producer service, we can download that onto our iPad, and we don't have to have our iPad connected to our computer to load it. That means that I can upload articles and my managing editor can download them onto their iPad, preview them, and provide feedback to me. So this is something that is an integral part of an Adobe Digital Publishing Suite workflow. All right. So now, and it wouldn't be a demo if InDesign didn't lock up on me. Go ahead and just restart InDesign there. And while InDesign's restarting, let's talk about some of the other automation capabilities we have within K4 and how they can be used inside the Digital Publishing Suite. I'll just go ahead and close these layouts here. So within K4, we have long had the capability to create XML from content that is in the workflow system. This allows publishers to create HTML and XML that's going to their web CMS and ultimately published out to their website. This is how folks like Business Week take content that's produced in K4 and publish it out to businessweek.com. But we also have the ability to use that XML automation, the XML exporter, to go and create content for the Digital Publishing Suite. What you just saw in the InDesign file I was working on was creating an InDesign layout that becomes an article within our folio. However, you also have the ability to create HTML content and have HTML be incorporated as articles within your workflow. This is how folks like The New Yorker very quickly paginate their content week after week and have that go out. They're not creating every single page using InDesign. Certainly they are creating some pages using InDesign, but they are able to use the automation, the XML and HTML capabilities of the Digital Publishing Suite to render that content as well. And that's very good for content that is repeatable in nature. If you were to take, for instance, an editor's welcome or a department page of a magazine which has the same layout issue after issue, that's something that can be automated, and that way a designer doesn't have to build those pages manually. So just to show you how this works, within InDesign here and in Copy, I have my article that's part of my layout. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger an automation that I built as part of my K4 workflow to create an HTML stack or an HTML article. And what K4 is going to do is it's going to go ahead and open up the XML export routine and trigger that. And K4 is then going to output HTML and export it out to the folder that I have here on my workstation. So we can see here that that HTML has been output. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. I'm just going to double click that. So I'm going to go ahead and just open this up inside Safari. But you might be wondering, well, what's that going to look like? What's that going to look like in my iPad? So I've gone ahead and I've opened up my Safari window, and I've really just made it the size of a 1024 by 768 window. And this, of course, is just a template design. You, of course, can design your own CSS, your own HTML templates, and then we can work with you to be able to automatically pour the editorial content into the HTML template. But what you can see here is that we've very quickly and easily gone and paginated our content. We've styled it, and we've even added images with interactivity so that I can tap on the image and reveal a lightbox view of that content and see it in more detail. So you can see this is a very easy and very repeatable way to create content that is following a templated design. And this ultimately means that, you know, some portion of your publication can be automated in terms of the publishing process for the Digital Publishing Suite. And then all we have to do is incorporate this into our overall folio is go into that folio builder panel in InDesign and actually import that into the folio file that K4 created and saved to the folio producer service. So the last bit of functionality I want to show you is Adobe CS6 and how this integrates with the K4 system. If you've been looking at the Adobe Creative Suite 6 platform and at InDesign in particular, you've probably heard a lot about liquid layout functionality. And liquid layout is really a next level tool that replaces what some of you may be familiar with in earlier versions of InDesign called layout adjustment. This allows you to build into your layouts and into your templates dynamic resizing information so that you can tell InDesign when you have different elements on the page and you go and change the size of your page, how do you resize these objects and what should you do with them? And so here you can see that as I click different elements on my page, the liquid layout panel here has different settings on how to handle this object and what to do with it so that we can, for instance, tell this two-column body copy that it should resize in height and width, but the bottom and left side of the frame should stay relative to the edge of the page, even when the page size changes. And so we can define all these parameters, and they're very typically set up within templates, but then of course we can also do this on the fly, and that's how most people are using this in terms of production. Some of it's built into templates, and designers are able to go and change the settings on the fly. But the idea is we want to go ahead and be able to set this up so that we can very easily go from one size and format of page to another. And InDesign CS6 has another feature called alternate layouts, and this allows you to have multiple, essentially, editions of your pages within one InDesign file. So you can think of this as having your iPad and your Amazon Kindle Fire editions laid out in the same layout. This presents some problems and some complications and some limitations. So K4 enables you to take advantage of liquid layout without the limitations of layout adjustment. And what you'll see I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into my K4 query palette and I'm going to ask K4 to create new variants of my layout. And variants are simply other versions, other editions of our layout. And I'm going to very quickly tell it I want an iPad portrait, a Kindle Fire portrait, and an Android 10-inch portrait edition of my layout. And K4 will automatically replicate that print file and it will go create 3 new editions of my InDesign file, and you can see them here. And what's going to happen now as part of my K4 workflow, these files are going to be automatically picked up by an Adobe InDesign server, and an automation that I've incorporated into my K4 system is going to run. That's going to take this layout that is built for my print trim size and built as spreads, and it's going to create single pages rather than facing pages. It's going to change the page size and the typographical settings, all while resizing the objects and loading in new object styles, and then it's going to turn it over to me as a designer so that I can go and access that. And you'll see just as quickly as I've been talking here, it's processed those 3 layouts, and we'll go ahead and open them up and take a look at them. So what you can see are 3 different layouts. I have my iPad, my Amazon Kindle Fire, and my Android. And we can see here, even on my first page, that as the page sizes changes, my iPad, of course, is 1024 by 768. My Kindle Fire is 1280 by 600, and my Amazon tablet is 1280 by 800. And on each of these, it's got a different trim size on that first page. But now when we go to the second page, we can see on my iPad edition, we can see it's resized page. My typographical settings, my text here is 15 point. And if I were to go back to my print layout, you'll see here that the text was 9 point. If I go to my Amazon 10-inch, go to my second page, you'll notice not only is my type 20 points, again, different than either of those 2 layouts, but you'll notice that this text is now single column text. And you'll notice the same if I go to the Kindle Fire portrait. And this actually takes advantage of object styles inside the InDesign workflow and loads them in to be able to tell the InDesign layout that when you're producing an Amazon Kindle Fire version of our layout, we don't allow two-column text in our body because the page is simply not wide enough, and we can load those in. And what you'll see is that we very quickly got 3 different versions of this layout that are not perfect and are probably still going to require a designer to do some tweaking and some final touches, and of course adding interactivity. Of course, you don't want to forget about that. But it is going to do the heavy lifting of changing the styles, changing the different definitions, and doing that in a way that's not going to leave the designer pulling their hair out and looking at it and saying, well, now I may as well have just designed this from scratch. It's going to go ahead and do some of that heavy lifting, turn it over to the designer, who can then do what they do best, which is making it final, making it perfect. So that's how K4 integrates with Liquid Layout and Adobe CS6. So that concludes our demonstration portion of this session. I'd like to take a few minutes and answer any questions you might have. And certainly we would like to follow up with you if you'd like to discuss your workflow specifically. One of the questions I got asked was, can I use the Folio Producer panel too? We didn't show this in the demonstration, but I did refer to it. Because K4 can upload files to the Folio Producer service, it's using the same mechanism that an InDesign user might use to save pages to their Folio file, save articles, whether they're HTML articles or InDesign articles. This means you can use a hybrid workflow where some of your pages are coming from K4 and some of your pages are coming from outside of K4. This is very useful if you have advertisers who are building content for your Folio files, or if you have freelance designers that you want to incorporate but are not part of your workflow. They can, of course, contribute content to your DPS Folio as well. Another question I got asked was how hard it is to set up Liquid Layout. That layout that you saw me do within the demonstration, that was a layout that I've been using for some time here for demonstrations back in CS5 and CS4. And when we upgraded to CS6, we went and applied Liquid Layout. That probably took 5-10 minutes to do the first time, and then we were good to go. Of course, some of the other work that does need to be done, and this is something that's typically done as part of your design process, is setting up new style definitions. So defining what your body copy point size is going to become when you're in your iPad edition or your Kindle Fire edition. And this is some of that pre-planning that our consultants work with customers on to help figure out beforehand, so that when it comes to the automation knows exactly what needs to happen. And then the last question, or one of the last questions we've got here is, does the Folio building and uploading tie up my machine? And the answer is no, and this is really one of the key benefits and differentiators between how K4 manages Folio files and how you would work with InDesign out of the box. With InDesign out of the box, when you want to create an article as part of your Folio, that actually gets built on your individual workstation, then uploaded to the Adobe servers. Within K4, we actually offload that process so that you can trigger that automation, but rather than that tying up your machine, that's gone and that automation is performed on a central server, and then from that central server, the file is uploaded to the Digital Publishing Suite. All the while, the designer has the ability to continue working on that layout or go and work on other layouts and come back to it. And then the last question before we wrap up today is that we use a lot of tabulated content. How well does Liquid Layout handle? And how far can layouts be automated to replicate across media? And this is a really good example of how K4 integrates with Liquid Layout. Liquid Layout within InDesign using alternate layouts does not allow you to change table styles, and cell styles in specific editions of those alternate layouts. And within K4, because we are actually separating this out and managing them as individual documents, when we perform those automations, we can change those table and cell styles, change those definitions, and ultimately reformat that. So one of our other customers that we're working with has and does use a lot of tables, and this was a limitation that they saw when they started using alternate layout. Now that they're working inside the K4 system, they can actually trigger those automations within K4, replace those definitions, and they get very, very close to their final format without very much manual effort. So it is definitely one of the key benefits, and that's a great question. So if you would like more information about the Adobe Digital Publishing Suite or about the Vjoon K4 system, please feel free to visit our website, www.maned.com, email myself or another member of our team, and we'd be happy to work with you.